All right. You should be now able to see slides and us. So this is kind of a different type of webinar in the fact that obviously two of us are presenting. We had to make sure we were at the same location because it was like, how do we make that work where it's still kind of seamless? So this is what we've got going on. As Kevin said, I'm Amber. It's pretty obvious. He would be a weird Amber otherwise. You guys me present before. But as my introduction, I am actually the AI skeptic in this presentation because we're taking it from a skeptic perspective and an enthusiast perspective, which is...
Hi there, I'm Greg Kipper. As it says, VP of Cyber. I am definitely the AI enthusiast. The majority of my time here and not here is spent working on AI, and we will talk a lot about that. Again, I have strong technical background, so we'll get deep into that as well.
Hopefully. So with that in mind, we have to start you off with a video. We have a couple videos in here because I don't believe you can talk about AI without having a couple videos because that would be appropriate. So let's get you started.
Oh. Let's take 5 everybody.
Hello, Li Zhongzhe. Welcome to your challenge. Answer 3 questions. Temperature dropping. Clock is ticking, Mr. Lee.
흰 셔츠에서 커피 얼룩을 지우는 방법은?
Blot and rinse the stain for excess liquid. Then detergent and vinegar will get it right out.
치즈를 피자에 잘 붙게 하는 방법은?
Use fresh, low moisture mozzarella. Don't use glue.
대한민국 최초로 에미상을 수상한 남자는?
So with that, so for context and background, AI has actually been with us a long time. It has obviously been evolving, and with the last few years with generative AI, it has become much more familiar. And that's really what generative AI, is. It's that ability to generate text and data that feels very human and very personable. It is not, but that is the experience we have, which has led to its vast adoption. But going back in time, we've really been using AI. For anyone in IT has been using AI for the last 35 years. Mobile devices, mobile phones specifically, AI is used, on thousands of times every second to place calls and route text messages and download YouTube videos and things like that. So it's been among us for a while, but now it's becoming, it's becoming a lot more personable, and that's what we're going to talk about.
I think it got a lot more marketing too. So that absolutely happened. So at the end of the day, so what is AI? We're going to cover a couple of the general open AIs out there that you could be using. So of course, it's funny that we asked Gemini, what is artificial intelligence? But at the end of the day, it's the creation of machines that can simulate human cognitive functions. And that's where that generative side that Greg is talking about comes in. So we're really going to focus on that. And we're going to work through some use cases as well from the two perspectives of more of that skeptic versus an enthusiast. And when I say he's an enthusiast, he is very much an enthusiast. He has a t-shirt. I just wouldn't let him wear it to the webinar. So here we go. Let's have one more video because I think this really explains some of a perspective on how the AI is actually thinking.
Machine learning can detect patterns in 250 dimensions. So if you take large amounts of one language and large amounts of another language, you could translate between them basically by seeing where the words sit next to each other.
Imagine a galaxy of stars. Only in this one, each star represents a word in the English language, and where they are in space depends on how the words relate to each other. The distance between the word man and king, for instance, is the same as the distance between woman and queen or girl and princess. By representing language geometrically like this, it can be broken down into a kind of math for words. And something remarkable was discovered by doing this. It turns out the shape of the English language universe, or latent space as it's called, is the same shape as every other human language.
I mean, you can actually lay the shape of one language on top of another and get a direct translation, right?
Exactly.
So with that, that's what you saw there was a visual representation of what's called a vector database. And if you've heard this term before, it is synonymous with artificial intelligence and the process of it, because AI machines do not understand English or Mandarin or any other language. It has to be a number. And what he said, a three-dimensional data set representing words, is exactly correct. It boggles the mind. People are not necessarily, unless you're a math savant, people are not really inclined to think in three-dimensional space as far as numbers. But that is what happens when data is translated to a vector database so that the AI can understand it. So we've got layers of artificial intelligence. We have the broadest one, which we've talked about, which simulates human thought. Simulates being the biggest key word there, because it is not aware of itself, even though it does a really good job of looking like it is. And I realize I'm the enthusiast kind of sounding like the skeptic, but I want you to understand what it is and what it isn't. Machine learning is a smaller subset. This is where you take data and my analogy is like learning to drive a car, which we've all done. And instead of being the machine we learn, we get reinforcement, or we try something and it doesn't work and we correct. Or we're given information from the get-go of don't run stop signs or don't aim for the ditch, stay on the road. Those kind of things, those kind of rules go into machine learning, and there's subsets of that as well. Then you get into deep learning. And this is what a lot of the big companies are doing, Facebook and Amazon being good examples of, we don't know what the answer is, but we know we have a whole lot of data. Let's look at it and see if we can see patterns that no human would ever be able to see. And this is where Facebook markets to you, and Amazon markets to you, and Netflix markets to you. So that's where deep learning comes from.
So I know one of the things that everyone always thinks of is, oh crap, am I going to lose my job to AI? So we did a little bit of research on this. It's actually pretty current. It's all happened within the last couple weeks. So Forbes did a study and kind of broke down some of the jobs that are going to disappear because of AI. So it starts out with some that are very logical. It would. So bookkeeping. Bookkeeping is literally doing the exact same process with math all the time. So it would be an excellent fit for AI because AI loves working with math in a set pattern. Paralegal work, that one might be a little bit of a surprise, but at the end of the day, when you do a lot of research or you do a lot of the same type of structured documents, it makes sense how AI would be able to take over that type of position. The next one was a little bit of a surprise to me, and that's the graphic design side of it, copywriting, journalism, all of those type of things. But then I realized, even as a skeptic, I'm using those skills probably more with AIs than I ever have in the prior 6 months, in the current 6 months. And the last one, which is a little bit harder, it's a little more complex there, is software development and engineering. And I think Greg's a perfect example of this because he's been able to teach himself coding through the use of AI. And I did not believe him initially. And then he started producing different programs and different things that, because we're obviously a technology firm at Parabon, and he was at that same level using AI as one of my mid-tier developers are on the team, who have had many, many years of experience. So I was pretty impressed that those type of things were happening with AI. And it made me want to subscribe a little bit more to the newsletter. Oh, wow. I hit the button a lot. Hang on. Going back. So big thing. Why is it important?
So as with any advancing tool, and we, many of us have watched the .com boom, or we're certainly, came about in our careers after it, and watched the rise of the internet and the rise of mobility and GPS and all of these systems that came together that essentially empowered the individual. If you think about, if I were to give you a fully functioning Android or iPhone and sent you back in time 30 years, you could do amazing things. You would be far more capable than 10 people standing next to you just with that one device. So AI is that next evolution, and it's going to take us to places that we haven't been, which is where the skepticism and the concern comes from. But from an efficiency and automation, really it's doing what computers have always done, which is faster calculations. It just does it quicker, and as Moore's law marches forward, cheaper. We get the data analysis and the insights, and this comes from the top one is we have so much infrastructure that can do this number crunching. And if you follow the news, you'll see ChatGPT or OpenAI or Grok or Google, how much money they are burning through to make all of this work. This is not free by any stretch of the imagination. The average cost, if you were to ask ChatGPT or Perplexity one question costs an average of about 15 cents in cloud time. So imagine that millions of times every hour, and now you start to see where they're getting these billions in burn rate, because it really isn't magic. It is just a lot of compute power. But that's changing and moving forward as well. The personalization, this is probably the big part that has made AI what it is it feels like it's talking to you. And there's some out there that they literally have personal conversations or deep insight conversations or romances with their AIs. And the AI, again, doesn't know them, doesn't understand, but it feels comfortable and familiar. And then enhanced decision-making. Really all that is better information. We've used that throughout our career. Search engines made that possible with Google. I could get better information. Therefore, it allowed me to, conclude that thought, design that strategy, whatever. So this is where it's taking us, and it's here now.
And part of it, from that skeptic perspective of it, is I was like, okay, what can I always love finding efficiency. That's a positive for any business owner. And so as I started implementing AI in different things, I realized that not only was it producing either the same content or better content, it was doing it so much faster than a human that I had in the exact same position. And yes, I will have you can boo if you want, but I've had to replace certain positions because I found that the machine was a more efficient choice for my business, because it did understand the data analytics and that personalized side. And this is that funny thing, because I was in Perplexity before we started, just asking it different questions. And I really did feel like I was kind of having a round table with someone else that feels the same way about certain topics. And, because I'm going back and forth, I'm like, oh, that was a good conversation. In fact, I was, of course, driving the conversation because I'm the human at the keyboard. But there is that part of it that really kind of was bringing me from that skeptic state, not quite to an enthusiast, but definitely at an implementer level, because I saw the value that it could do.
Okay, so, and with that, here's, getting into the tech, here's how it really works. And, it always starts with data. It's the age-old computer statement, garbage in, garbage out. And so you start with your data. In the case of Perplexity or ChatGPT, it's a prompt. How you craft it, what you say, obviously is going to affect the outcome. So when that prompt goes in, it is processed depending on the environment. In some case, Perplexity is a great example because it goes out and it specifically gets the resources. It's as though you were to have had an assistant and say, go find me that article, find me that video, find me that blog post that supports the answer to my question. That's really what it's doing. So it does that processing, it puts it through the outcomes, it's vector data set. This is where it no longer is human readable. It's really just three-dimensional math, which still makes my head hurt even saying that. And then it becomes, it starts to adjust and it processes it. And this is where the generative part takes place. And this is where, that example in the video of, man is to king is closer than it would be woman is to king, and it starts to put these words together really, really well. But understand, it has no clue what it's saying. It is just patterns, but it's so many that it gets it really close to being right. And there's obviously, some challenges there if you take it on blind faith, but going through its processes, it puts all that together and then it outputs that answer that you see on the screen.
So this is how I started using AI within my business. So the first thing that I had as my panic was, I need a policy. Which I'm sure some of you feel that way as well. But really, when you start implementing any type of technology within your organization or even in your investigations, I still have to have a policy for it. Because if I were an expert called to the stand, that's my first thing that's going to back me up, is I have a set policy and how we use the AI, when we're going to use it, so on and so forth. And then I have a set plan of how often I am going to review the use of that AI as well. So that was one of the first things, because I did not want everyone in the company to just jump on ChatGPT and start uploading company information. That was not going to be something that made me very happy. So I started with a policy, and I think that's a good place for a lot of people, whether you're a skeptic or an enthusiast. A policy is important. And I'm happy to share some of the policies that we've written, and with any of you. You can email me after the webinar. The other side of it is I wanted within my policy to ensure how our data is going to remain secure. And that's relevant to me in forensics. It's also relevant to me as a business owner, because data is your value. It's the value to your evidence. It's the value to your company. And so I made sure that I was using AI in an instance of which I knew I could be as private as humanly possible based on reading the policies of the AIs I was using. And then, of course, you start slow with doing different prompts. I have a screenshot here. This is actually Sintra AI. And this was a perfect example of how it used different bots, as you can see them all up here, the AI employees, as it calls them. And they were all trained on a model for a particular knowledge base. And then I gave them the rest of the knowledge about my company. So then I was able to have conversations specifically on copywriting, or it did have like a personal development, like how do I just feel better every day, which I thought was funny. It was very Gen Z. To email marketing, to if I wanted to do SEO work for my website. Each one knew what their particular expertise was. And then I was able to feed and teach it the data about my company, Paraben. And I found that was an excellent entry point. At this point, I've actually evolved beyond this platform, however, with the way that I'm using AI.
And so, as the enthusiast, everything on this chart and then some, I have an understanding of familiarity with. So I wanted to know what it all did and why. And as with any technology, particularly, it's really just software at the end of the day. As with any software, there is always, a million and one variants for everyone's need. But of course, the approach is, of course, you need this. It's the solution looking for a problem. So AI is no different, and the capabilities and the needs and the requirements are quite literally as different as every individual and their needs. A lot of flexibility, but really when it comes down to the great thing that I've discovered about AI and what I've done with it, what I continue to do with it, is kind of the level of personalization. And this is what it's going to take us forward with in our future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But from a flexibility, it runs on everything. Of course, I'm not tethered to my computer. I've got apps. I've got it on my mobile. The minute I have a good idea, I'm talking to either Perplexity or some of the AIs that I've written to go do this task or capture this idea or follow through on this thought. So it's, it just extends my creativity, my thought process, all of the thinking that I bring to it, but it's not going to do that without me. So this is where the human matters. For research, as my bio said, I've written 5 books in my career, so I know how to research old school. Spent many months, in some cases years, researching a book. I had a personal moment of just, it was a little bit of, amusement and depression at the same moment when I fed it the table of contents to my very first book that I wrote back in 2002. And in about 15 minutes, it wrote a better version of my book than I did. So research is pretty great. Business challenges, give me a solution to this problem. Help me research this market. Let me, if I were running this way, what might be the outcome? So it gives a lot of great information. The information's out there. This just helps really wrangle it. And then, as Amber said, the software development side, which is what I'm finding the most interesting and arguably the most difficult, because it does require a great deal of my time and effort to guide it the right way. So that will, and I know they were doing a lot of work on that, but from what I've learned and from what I've learned how to do, it would be a very interesting conversation, even if I were to go back and talk to myself 6 months ago, and what I didn't know compared to what I know now, and more importantly, how I think differently, as opposed to how traditional software development is actually still being done. So this is part of my enthusiasm, but the applications are really as broad as your imagination.
So on that point, one of the things, as that enthusiast perspective, I actually got a notice the other day from Samsung, because I have a lot of smartphones, but I have some Samsungs, and it gave me the option that now I can replace Google as my engine on there with Perplexity. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very interesting trend difference that I didn't expect to happen so soon, if you want the truth of it. I mean, we showed you a commercial, obviously, in the beginning, talking about how good Perplexity is as an engine, but the fact that we're seeing a major mobile manufacturer do that switch tells you how quickly this is actually happening. So we kind of made this, you never told me you knew that. And the big thing with AI is you have to ask. And it's surprising because we asked a bunch of questions to multiple AIs. We brought it down to just 4 that we're going to talk about really in here to keep it easy for you, because there's just too many. There's a lot of them. So let's start out with this one. Greg's actually working on a class for this that we should have available before the end of summer. That's all going to be online.
Yep. So prompt engineering, you've probably heard this term. If you've sat down at any one of these and asked it a question, prompt engineering. It's ask it an effective question. And a lot of times that's the iterative process, and that's okay. You start out with, tell me what the DFI investigator does. Let's start broad, and then it's that old school 20 questions game. We start to whittle it down to being more precise. That's a good place to start. The more specificity you can give, depending on what you're doing, and this is where the human involvement really matters. It's, let's think this through. Let's pretend as though, I'm being interviewed, and put yourself under that level of pressure. What would your response be? And if you kind of put yourself in that mindset, that increases the quality of your question and thus your prompt. And then again, you can be conversational. Tell me more about that. Often the reason we like Perplexity so much is it also offers suggestions of, here's a follow-on question. And in a lot of cases, I'm like, I never knew that.
Think of that. I had that happen all the time.
Yeah, what a great idea. Tell me more. Tell me all about a Pegasus. And it's like, some of them have unicorn horns. Never knew that. Let's talk about that. So
I'm going to give you an example here of one I use. So this is a marketing prompt. And this is a great example for how people who might own their own business, because there are a lot of those in Cyber Social Hub, that you can go through and how do I immediately employ the use of AI? So if I would generate a prioritized list of the 25 to 30 highest volume primary keywords for digital forensic consulting or private investigations, and include these things with it, it will come out with a fairly good research for you. But I want you to look at how long that prompt is. It's not one of those that it's a one sentence, hey, how are you feeling today? It's nothing like that. And I think that's one of the keys that Greg brought up with the prompt engineering, is to make sure you're really going for what you want to know. At the end of the day, you almost have to think more about what your prompt will be than what you do in typing out your prompt.
Yep.
So that's just a good example for you. So let's talk about the risks, because I know we had to have a Terminator look somewhere in this because it's talking about AI. You just can't avoid it. Okay. I know the whole you were warned in 1984. I feel like the Terminator actually cared, though. That was this whole character arc in the thing. Oh, fine. He didn't care in the first movie, but I get it. His AI was a little different. So what do you think the risks are?
So the big one right now is data sharing. And we're seeing that. All you have to do is do a little bit of research on OpenAI specifically, since ChatGPT is kind of the buzzword of that's what's primarily associated with most generative AI. But the way that that's being operated, they essentially scoured the internet. They took all of the input and data and everything that people have been creating for the last 30 years and used that to train their AI system. And then, a year and a half later, another language model came out called DeepSeek, which used ChatGPT's engines to make another large language model, which is really the heart of generative AI. This is the engine that really drives all that. But what ChatGPT spent hundreds of millions, if not billions, on by the time it was all said and done to make, DeepSeek was able to do for $5 million. And of course, that irritated them to no end. And they're like, well, you're stealing our data to do this. And it's like, well, you stole all of our data to do the same thing. So that ethical and legal issue is continuing to evolve. But data sharing is a big one. So if you're a ChatGPT user, I really wouldn't put in your name. Don't put in personal information. Don't ask it, hey, this is a medical condition I have specifically. Tell me what you think.
Right.
Let's,
read their privacy policies, because it's going to tell you how much data they share by reading those policies.
Right. And it's kind of like, if you wouldn't put that in a search engine on Google or DuckDuckGo, I wouldn't put it in a generative AI solution as well. Hallucinations. This is another one. As I said earlier, it does not understand language. It understands patterns. It just appears to us to really understand language because there's a pattern to our language. But this is where you get the hallucination problem. And this is something that we've spent a lot of time here at Parabon effectively eliminating in our solution. But a hallucination is basically, generative AI wants to give you an answer. And it is programmed to go, hey, if you ask it a silly question, it's going to make the best possible answer. And in some cases, we'll see in a later slide where attorneys have gotten into trouble. Tell me about case law for this. And it didn't exist. The people didn't exist. The case didn't exist. The judge that ruled on it didn't exist. And they went in there going, hey, I've got all this backing me up. And they got beheaded right there in the courtroom, metaphorically. So be careful of hallucinations.
I think with the hallucinations, a very important thing, because that's probably the biggest one that we see talked about in social media by different digital forensic investigators, is it's going to tell me the wrong answer. If the AI is designed for a specific purpose, it's not going to. It's all about that design factor that is what generates up the hallucinations. When you go mainstream, you're using ChatGPT, even Perplexity, they can all have hallucinations associated with them. That's where it comes down to your prompt, and it goes back to that human factor that says, let me verify what this AI is telling me. It's supposed to be an assistant. It's not supposed to take over your brain.
Just like a search engine assisted you in getting to information faster. This is a much different evolution, but not to simplify it, because it is much more. And then talking about guardrails and boundaries and responsibilities. So, for example, our AI that we have as our offering, you could never say, hey, go access Parabon's bank accounts and transfer all their money to us. Those are guardrails. There are certain things that it's just not allowed to do. However, depending on what you're using AI for, some people could actually have that happen. So that is some of the risks that it's with any computer system or any software. You have to put certain security things in place, and that's one aspect of it.
So in theory, we're not going to have a Terminator come out in the next year.
Couple of years.
Couple years, maybe. There we go. We feel better now. Couple years. So here's some for you, and I have a couple of these slides just to bring it up. They're very, very current. They're from May. That it says, oh, they're making stuff up because they were relying on artificial intelligence generated documents, and they were citing fake cases. And this judge called out the attorneys on this very factor. This next one, it has a website across the top there. I really like this one because he actually keeps kind of a mean total going on of the AI hallucination cases. However, I want you to look at how big the number is. It's only 149 cases. That's not huge compared to the number, the gross volume of cases that are out there being prosecuted. It's really not horrible, but it does do a really good job with this, and it's something to watch for. If you're looking for where some AI case law is, this one is excellent because it actually goes international as well. And the last one here, this one kind of cracked me up. It was just put out in social media, I think last week. And they used ChatGPT to analyze a case, which I was like, so many bad choices. Not even as an enthusiast, I knew immediately this is some bad choices. And I think this is where AI ends up getting kind of a bad rep, so to speak.
Yeah, it's all in how it's used, and ChatGPT was definitely the wrong choice. So
It was. Yes, horrible.
Not to tout our tool, but ours was designed for this. But it's not. It was never designed to replace the investigator. It's going to augment the investigator, with these invisible staff members that can get you the answers. But in the end, if you're the one signing the report, or better yet, giving expert testimony,
be ready.
Yeah, we're there to help you get that done because you're the one that's accountable. The AI isn't going to care or even know.
So we're going to talk about our 4. They're not necessarily our top picks. We pick some of them based on popularity, which is why ChatGPT is up there. Neither one of us actually like ChatGPT at all.
We use it very rarely.
I don't think I ever use it.
Yeah,
it's just not my fave. However, we were just at a conference together talking with different people about AI, and this was the number one they said they were all using.
Yeah.
I was so surprised.
Again, it's got the popularity to it.
It does.
Everyone. It's kind of like saying, well, instead of having, it's like having a Coke, not a Pepsi or an RC. It's a Coke, and it's become it's become that kind of associated of ChatGPT is now all AIs, and it's really not.
Which is the same as people thinking Google is every search engine on the planet.
Correct.
Those same things have happened, but you're kind of getting that same problem where you can use it. I'm sure some of you have been using it. You might be paying for an account with it, thinking you're going to get better results with it. The fact is you need to go through and so research it, understand its privacy policies, and understand that you are sharing a lot of information. I mean, that's the biggest concern with ChatGPT. So here's the next one. So this one is one of my favorites, but it's one of my favorites, and I know it's Google, so you're like, oh, she took the Google Kool-Aid. The reason I like Gemini is that it is probably the best at understanding contents of documents. So I consider myself a fairly good writer. I have not put out 5 books like Greg has, but I have worked on different books. I've spent a lot of time refining my writing skills, and I absolutely hate Gemini because it's a better writer than me. So when I ask it to rewrite something, or I give it some things and I say, okay, I want you to summarize that differently because I'm trying to find the perfect way to say it, Gemini is the AI for that. The interesting forensic artifact about this, though, Gemini prompts are actually stored in your Google Takeout. So make sure when you're using it and you're using it for a case, let's say it's rewriting your summary for you, whatever it may be, have a set Google account that is your investigative account because it will store all those prompts as part of your Takeout. So you kind of get a log of Gemini. I like that. I thought that was a nice bonus.
Yeah, and that's
to it.
And with anything, and Google in particular is, its business model is advertising, so it has to understand this. But at the same time, there's that converse balance of how much data are you giving it to how much data does it need to actually continue to function. And this is why we're showing you different sources. I use Google, but I use a lot of other things too.
Right.
I distribute my data. I distribute what is connected. So it's not, oh, I'm all Google all the time, so they know everything about me. Make it a little more challenging.
I think they do know everything about you anyway. But just say,
and they rank as the biggest knowledge repository ever created. And they're not going away. So this is the point in history that we find ourselves. So. Take that for what it is. But we're kind of all in the same boat on this one.
True. This is one of your favorites.
Yeah. So Claude is, by Anthropic. This is another company. Claude is, if I were to describe Claude as a person, it's sort of that humble country doctor, if you can imagine, that kind of person where they're very wise. They know what they know, but they're not going to give you bad information if they don't know it. And this is where I like to use Claude for a lot of specific things. It's got very good guardrails of if it doesn't have that information, it's not going to hallucinate and give it to you. It's also very wordy, same country doctor archetype. Let me tell you a story. Let me talk about this. If you ask Claude a question, what could be answered in 2 paragraphs will be answered in about 10. In some cases, that's great, but it's, this is a contrasting favorite. I use this with Perplexity in concert, and, you get some different results.
And that's our last one, actually, because we both like Perplexity. He actually introduced me to it, and I was surprised after I started using it, because some of the things I really liked about it was the fact that it took one of my prompts and it prompted me for others. Like, well, if you're asking about this, what about these 5 other things? Have you thought of those? And that's where I feel the conversation happens with Perplexity that doesn't necessarily happen with some of the other AIs out there. So I've really liked it for that. And I think it's fantastic with its OSINT capabilities.
Right. And that's the part that this is the interesting side about Perplexity. And just for, for the techies out there that want to play with this, you can build your own version of Perplexity. I have a couple versions running on different machines that are completely private. They function exactly the same way. It's just, I'm not going through Perplexity's cloud. But it shows the value, the fact that the Perplexity has got, it's in the double-digit billions in valuation now, and is being offered as a replacement to Google on an Android phone.
That's still crazy.
Should tell you how useful this is, and the fact that its usability is not going to wane. So, and as with most things that are really useful, often they're very straightforward. Hence, it's open source. It uses a lot of what's out there, but it does it in a very unique way, and it does it in a really friendly way. So
definitely one of our favorites for both of us. So let's talk about our AI with investigations. You can use AI to do a huge number of different things, but in digital investigations, we typically focus, you can do video, you can do electronic communication. So I can use it to analyze, text messages, because there's typically 500,000 of them on someone's phone, malware.
Or associate, to talk electronic communications, just anything. We've got a use case where we were really hard on ourselves, and we took the worst type of corporate environment of Splunk logs, firewall logs, mobile data, emails, everything like that. No one was talking to anybody. Imagine all departments that's not my job. I don't know what they're doing. And we put all of that data in one place and say, find me the correlations. Tell me who's talking to who. And one text message associates with an email, with associates to a Splunk log capture and a firewall traffic that says, oh, so-and-so was talking to so-and-so at 2 a.m. when they shouldn't have been. And
they mentioned the IP address.
They mentioned the IP address, and what about the IP address? What else is, and that leads to the next question. And now all of a sudden, we have, a really interesting insight into what's going on with these 2 users that would take human beings months, if ever, to find
it, for sure. So we did a really practical use case that I knew the answer for, so I'd know if it was inaccurate or not. So who are the manufacturers of Faraday bags was my prompt I asked, and who owns the US patent on EMI shielding bags? I knew that because it's me that owns a patent on it. So I was like, okay, let's see if it comes up with the information. So we asked ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity. So ChatGPT was not accurate at all. It was like wackadoodle off of there. It was not even close. Gemini was accurate, but not 100% accurate. So I was at that 80th percentile. Claude was actually not accurate at all either.
And Claude's,
And it's just about the prompt. It was how I had the prompt framed. I used the same prompt with all of them, so I didn't adjust for how each of those AIs function. And then Perplexity was actually the most accurate about it, which makes sense because it pulls the most research resources. So when we went and we looked for this, it's like, if you suspect, this is out of Gemini, it says, if you suspect infringement, it then promotes another Google service. So it has Google patent searches, so you could lurk that way. But of course, Google is then going to promote Google. So that makes sense. As I continued in and asking more, they couldn't directly answer. So I didn't get a hallucination. I definitely got a no as I can continue to ask other questions, which was good. That's a good sign of it. And when the last part of it, without this level of detailed legal and technical analysis, any attempt to identify potential infringement products would be speculative and potentially inaccurate. So that's where we're seeing that AI kind of evolve a little bit. It's not giving me the wrong answer, but it's not giving me an answer.
Well, and hallucinations have been in the news, for the last couple of years, which is an eternity.
Yeah.
AI time it is changing daily. And I could talk to you about my evolution on this, but it literally was one day I had an understanding, and then the very next day I felt like, I was a newbie. And then I felt that way the next day and the next day. And I would have conversations with friends and clients. And I'm like, I don't know what Greg you're going to meet next week, because I know how much more I have yet to learn. And that's just in 4 or 5 days. So with what's happening here, the fact that hallucinations are starting to be reined in, they see that that's a problem, and they're
fixing
to work on that.
It's the fact they're fixing it. And this is a good example. This is out of Perplexity here. So I had my original questions I had asked, and now you can see up there that it came up with other questions. So other prompts that it's like, maybe you want to learn more about this. Maybe you want to learn about this. And it is one of those reasons that I really like it. So it was a win.
Yep. So, and talking about our AI solution, and this one has been in development, for many months, but we put a lot of strong work and best practices in it. So forensics and what we do here at Parabon, just, I'll call it old school now, pre-AI, of taking all of this data, processing it, preparing it for you as the analyst or the investigator to do that. What we really do really well is data processing and preparation. That is exactly what AI needs. So with that, we have made it forensic grade preparation. All of those best practices, all of those data sources still come into this. The data is then normalized. It is, E3 does a fantastic job. In fact, E3 has been used by Microsoft for probably over 10 years now to prep their data for their cognitive services, which is their AI. But they love using it because it normalizes all of the data and gets it ready. Once it gets to our Xandra AI platform, that is when it gets converted into that vector data set. And we have that security and appropriate, it's just like with any other database. But now you are in control of that. You get to take what evidence you wanted to analyze, and you process it with Xandra, and then begin to ask it. And it has a series of agents and experts. It's not really one AI.
No,
Xandra's
it's many.
more of a group of AIs that are all designed to work together as a team. So if you envision walking into your ideal team to answer a question, you walk into a meeting room, and every type of person that you go, I want you to tell me about this type of Android or this type of iPhone or this type of email. That's what Xandra is. And
it was the brainchild of a digital forensic expert. Ralph Gorgal, who is the one who did the big design side of Xandra, really thought about it from that point. And when we decided on the name for it, I think it really brings out what AI is for. So Xandra in ancient Greek means to help. I know no one's going to know that, but that's what that name really means, is because at the end of the day, with the amount of data that we're facing as digital investigators, it's actually just too much. Because the time to be able to find a conclusion and the amount of data that you're having to deal with are beyond what our human natural comprehension can be, even with the use of tools. If I were to ask Xandra a question about correlating the data, and I was to do a crazy long Boolean expression in E3, Xandra's going to come back with the answer like days in advance, because she's going to take minutes. E3 is going to take hours, perhaps days, because of the large exponential growth of our data sets that we have to look at. So that's really something you have to consider when you start choosing whether or not you're going to implement AI. It's really looking at that big problem, which the big problem is actually just data. It's just too much data.
It's always
data. So here's a perfect example, because, and I realize you probably can't see it super well, but I want you to look at what a prompt looks like when you're looking at it from a digital investigation perspective. So this is a massive prompt. It's not just 2 sentences. This is solve my case for me, because that's not going to work. It's never going to work. But this is going through that scenario that Greg talked about, and I actually have this done up in a graphic as well. But the prompt isn't simple. It's had a lot of thought put into it prior to putting it through the AI, so that you know you're going to get as close to the actual answer as you want. So here's this exact same prompt now done into a graphical form, because it's way easier to explain because it's so hard on the screen.
So, again, phase one, what are our collection tool, analysis, and preparation. Takes all of that disparate data And this is what you're using every day when you're using E3 and making your analysis.
And that's any tool as
And
well.
that's any tool,
Collection
yeah. Mhm.
collection is irrelevant for tool. Obviously, we work at Paraben. I own Paraben. I use Paraben's tool for it. But really, any tool on the collection side can normalize data into and put it into our phase 2, which is our analytic phase, which is where we would go through and start using our AI, get that data normalized, and then start saying, hey, I'm looking for an incident that happened on January 1st at 12:02 a.m. and this is happening, and I'm building that prompt associated with it.
Right. And then that moves on to, again, it's the 20 questions. I've got the answer to that question, and we've done cases where, okay, what happened 10 minutes prior? You can ask it that. Tell me what happened leading up to this. Is there anything indicating? And this is where you, as the investigator, knowing the context of the case and the context of the project, weigh in.
And it's kind of nice because at the end of the day, when you get to that phase 4, which you're taking evidence into court, you're giving a presentation. It might not be court, it might be a client, whatever it may be. You have all the reference points back to your original data set. And that's the difference of using something that's designed as a forensic AI or to do as a proper investigative AI versus going back. If I were to put this exact same scenario through ChatGPT, not that I want to pick on them, I'm not going to be able to have that validity phase that I want by phase 4. I'm not going to be able to validate what my entire process is that I went through in order to find the results that I had. So that is something you have to consider. So we're going to talk a tiny bit about ethics because we're getting close to the end of our time slot. So here we go. It's always fun. It's documentation. It's always documentation, everyone.
And fortunately, it's easier to do that. Start out with organization, and a lot of times, depending on the tools that you use, it keeps a record of all of your prompts, just like with Gemini and showing your prompts. If you're using Perplexity and you have an account, even if it's a free or a paid account, free accounts even keep track of, here's all the questions you asked. So it helps with that, but have a process. Think about what you're doing, think about what could be asked at the end, and then and work that in. Again,
it's the no magic.
It's the no magic.
It's really no magic.
You're all technologists. Computers they don't just work. They're very specific. Even though they're crazy complex and they feel magical, they're not. You move one bit one way or another, and the whole system can break. So remember that. Keep that in mind, and be able to explain how it's working. And if you have to dig deep, this is where it comes back to the forensic investigator side. You have to be able to repeat it.
Absolutely.
And then security design.
And I think Sandra is actually our example for this one, because unless you're creating private instances of AIs or designing an AI yourself, you need to know that it was fundamentally designed to be private and secure. If you're going to use it in a digital investigation, you're not going to randomly just choose something out there that's sharing the data everywhere. And when we designed Xandra, that was one of the goals and objectives, is you get a private cloud instance or it gets locked into a GPU-centric machine. And I know there's a lot of those out there. And Manny is actually talking about that tomorrow if you haven't signed up for his webinar, GPU machines. But it's one of those things that you really have to decide. That is your commitment. You want to make sure its secure design is good, that it follows my forensic processes and my workflows.
Yep. And we've been getting a lot of that when people contact us. They want to use Xandra, but they're like, how do I explain to this attorney that it is secure? And we have that process. We can show you, and there's still going to be a lot of cultural transition, but we designed it from the ground up, and again, completely transparent. We can show you how it works, and you'll understand that.
Okay, so our favorite part is we like to do futures thing whenever we present together. We don't always do it, but when we do, we always make sure we have a futures thing, because that is part of what we have team meetings about all the time. So our last video.
Today, we're talking about something that's already happening, but nobody's prepared for CUA agents taking over KVM jobs. Don't worry if those terms sound like alphabet soup. I'm going to break everything down in plain English and show you why this might be the most important workplace revolution of our lifetime. Let me paint you a picture. Sarah, an executive assistant at a Fortune 500 company, spends her days scheduling meetings, formatting PowerPoints, organizing spreadsheets, and responding to emails. Last year, these tasks took her 40 hours a week. Today, an AI agent does 60% of her job. By next year, that number will be 90%. What's happening is the rise of what insiders call CUA agents, conversational user agents. These aren't just chatbots. These are AI systems that can literally take control of your computer. They can move your mouse, they can type on your keyboard, they can read what's on your screen and interact with any software you use. And they're getting smarter by the day. This revolution is happening because of 3 massive breakthroughs. First, language models like GPT-4 can now understand virtually any task you describe in plain English. Second, we've cracked the code on computer vision. AI can now see and understand what's happening on a screen just like a human can. Third, and most crucially, we've developed reliable ways for AI to control keyboard and mouse inputs, what tech folks call KVM jobs. In other words, if your job involves sitting at a computer all day, clicking buttons, typing information, and making decisions based on what you see on screen, AI can now do that job, and not just poorly or slowly. In many cases, it can do it faster, more accurately, and 24/7 without breaks.
So the first thing to know, Greg actually introduced me to her. I love the Star Trek because all of you guys know I'm a Trekkie, 100%. But the other side of it, so this is Julia McCoy. Julia McCoy. And that's not her. She has an entire company that is designed to simply design an AI avatar for you.
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
this is her virtual clone. This is Dr. McCoy. This is not Julia McCoy.
Yeah, sorry. That's why she has an appropriate uniform.
Yeah, we cut that clip out where she she introduces herself as her digital clone.
Yeah.
But probably many of you didn't even notice that was fake. It just looked like, interesting editing with the breaks and the pauses. But even just the realism, talking about the future, the one that I'm watching very closely and am most interested in, at least in the short term, is what this is about to do to Hollywood. It is
the NBA finals. Actually, they had their first 100% AI production commercial that was put out for it, and it cost them $500. And normally it costs them like $5 million. It was like a crazy number difference between the two, and it was actually good. It was a good commercial.
So seeing just with Julia's digital clone, imagine all actors being that way. And my forecast is we will see a full AI movie feature film probably before the end of the year. We have that tech now, and I know there's courses out there that will teach you how to do start to finish an entire movie production by yourself using just AI.
I have some books I would love to have turn into movies and not have Hollywood screw them up for me.
That's
going to be the thing.
The last point on entertainment, this is going to be really exciting, is for all of you that have your favorite movie that was ruined because it was
done poorly,
like the book, or you have a fantastic story that's a 15-book series that no Hollywood producer could ever afford to make. What we're going to have in the very near future is the ability to give it a book and go, make that a movie for me. Or have 100 people go, make this 100 versions of this same movie, and let me pick and choose my best, or do the adaptation. So we're going to see a very interesting change in what we've come to know as video entertainment in movies.
And our last little thing is the robots. And I brought this up before in other presentations I have, because I'm crazy excited that I can own a robot next year. That is just nuts. And it's only like 10 grand to have an autonomous robot. I've actually started a little jar I put in my kitchen counter, and I put my change and things in it for my robot savings account. But the fact that I can have an autonomous robot that can work 24/7, that I can tell it exactly what I want to have done, that is amazing. My husband one day is going to be so excited because his honey-do list is going to now be done by a robot. It will be fantastic. And that is a reality that is coming in 2026. It's like already announced. I mean, I'm not an Elon fan in general, but hey, I'll take his robot.
He's one of many. Yeah, Elon's got the Optimus robot, which he's going to price between 10 and 20,000. But if you think about it, an easier example, even with what he's doing with Tesla and their competitor, which is Waymo, which I've ridden in. And last year, I did my first autonomous taxi ride, and it was fantastic. San Francisco in the rain, so up and down wet hills, drove like a dream. But the big part that I noticed was walking around the city the next day, and I saw like 10 or 12 of them driving around empty. And I realized there has to be, even if there's 50 driving around the city empty, every hour, that's 50 hours of experience and learning. So imagine having your own personal robot that now knows how to vacuum your house or do the dishes or mow the lawn, but it's tapping into a data set that millions of other robots have done the same thing with different lawns, different living rooms. All of that experience, you're going to have a level of quality that, humans just can't match.
It's very exciting. So what we've done, because this is a lot to obviously take in, especially if this is your first kind of exposure into generative AI, is that I put together an ebook. It was me and some of Gemini too, because she had to rewrite my stuff, which, she's good at it. But if you take a screenshot there of the QR or hit the QR, you'll be taken and you can get a download link after. It doesn't take you directly to the ebook. I will admit to that because I didn't want someone to get rickrolled. Don't want that to happen. So, but that takes you to the site that can do that. We'll do a follow-up email that allows you to have the download link as well. It's about 35 pages of really understanding how us as investigators can use generative AI that are going to be beneficial for us. Because if you are a smaller lab and let's say you don't have 10 examiners working for you, AI is here for you. That is really what the advantage is small teams can now multiply their efforts. And it's a huge deal.